Hello again. Last week I talked about how to structure your training over the seasons. So I thought this week I might talk about how I might create a training week, what I consider to be important, what I consider to be less important, and basically my philosophy for training for endurance sports like running or cycling, so ultra distance events particularly. So there are lots of things that we could train and lots of buzzwords like FTP, critical power, VO2 max, which is basically the higher aerobic powers, your maximum aerobic capacity, economy, efficiency, how efficiently do you run or cycle, your digestive system, you can train your digestive system, you can train yourself to be able to tolerate more and more carbohydrates, and mental skills, your durability, how tough are you, how much discomfort can you sustain and how long can you sustain that for. And what I've been wondering is whether we can look at it from a work and energy perspective. So considering you've got a certain event, so if it's a one-day event, you've got to, you might be running 50 miles like Claire did a couple of weeks ago, or you might be cycling, 200 kilometers, 400 kilometers, 600 kilometers, and that would be sort of one go. And you would have to do a certain amount of work to do that. Say you averaged 150 watts for 12 hours, you just need to multiply your 150 by 12 and that get 12 hours time, converted into seconds, and that gives you the number of kilojoules that you used. And because of our body's efficiency, that's a reasonable estimate to how many calories you're using. So you can easily calculate how much energy you might use in an event and also the rate of energy use. And then, of course, you've got to put some energy into your system. You've got to eat something. Because if you're actually doing an event that lasts you more than a couple of hours, for instance, eating makes a huge difference. And if you're doing an event that takes several days, well, if you don't eat, you're probably going to be in some difficulty, particularly if you don't drink as well. So obviously you've got to put some energy in, you do some work, and that energy comes out in your power. And quite fortunately, as humans, the efficiency factor works such that, roughly speaking, the number of kilojoules that you expend in your riding or your running is roughly equal to the number of calories that you need to, to support that, to put back into your system to perform. But also, don't forget, like one of the athletes that I coached did when she was trying to work out her calorific needs. It takes so much energy to live. You've got to add that on to the amount of work that you're doing during the event. I hope you're with me. It's a bit complicated and a bit waffly, but it seems like quite a nice model to me, that you expend a certain amount of energy and you have to put a certain amount of energy in. And of course, the faster you can go through that process, the faster you can perform your event. You're not trying to do the highest average power that you can do for the event. You're trying to do the highest average speed for the event. So if you ride intelligently or run intelligently, you might be able to expend less energy and still go faster than somebody who's using more energy but they're not using it in a very efficient way. So moving that forward, if you look at the power profile for somebody doing an ultra endurance event, so you can see from Claire's profile in the 50-mile race that she did a couple of weeks ago, you can see that her power delivery wasn't constant. She worked a bit harder on the climbs, a bit less hard on the descents, and as a consequence, you can see that the power delivery is not equal, and therefore her energy delivery is not equal. And she might go above her, above her aerobic threshold for some parts of the run and below it for other parts of the run. And if you look at a long bike race, you can see from the bike packing race here, the first day or two of the Transatlantic Way race a few years ago, that the rider is going well above what you might expect, well into the zone 3 and actually sometime in the training zone 4 around their FTP, and using up quite a lot of glycogen reserves and using glycolysis to fuel themselves. So to get this most efficient performance, you are riding or running at higher powers and lower powers. So it's not like the most efficient way of generating the highest average power. If it were flat, for instance, you would be to just do a constant pace. But because these events, ultra trail races and bike packing races and mountain bike marathons and things like that, they're not on the flat. So you've got to work a bit harder and then a bit easier and try and work hard and recover. So that your training has to reflect that. The way I look at it is to split it up into two boxes, one being trying to improve your FTP, your critical pace, your lactate threshold, and the higher you can get that, the quicker you recover from any given higher intensity effort. So if you have to ride or run up a hill at a higher intensity just because it's so steep perhaps, or because it's a good strategy, then the higher your FTP or your critical pace, the lower proportion of that you're going at, or you might go at a fixed proportion because that's your pacing strategy, so the faster you'll go. And the quicker you'll recover, because the more you are below that critical pace, that critical power, the faster your recovery is. And also the less energy you use, the less of your glycogen reserves, or the less of your blood glucose you use to fuel yourself. So you're more efficient at higher powers by improving your FTP or your critical pace. And then the other one is improving your efficiency. So improving your sustainable pace, your highest sustainable speed, or your highest sustainable power would be what you might train for. And basically you do that by doing long rides, or long runs, just having a reasonably high training volume. Improving your economy and efficiency, improving that aerobic threshold, eating and drinking effectively, and training your body to handle nutrition more effectively, so it processes the food that you're taking in more effectively and supplies your muscles more efficiently. And also developing your mental skills so that you are more resilient, so that you can actually work perhaps a little bit harder than you might otherwise be able to, just because you're a little bit tougher. It's not, these things are not, sport is not just physical, there's a big mental component to it. So with these two boxes, you train your FTP by doing intervals and doing a reasonably high aerobic volume, and you train your aerobic threshold, your economy, your efficiency by doing a high aerobic volume, sustained efforts that might be at your tempo pace. I know people like to be polarised, and I quite like the polarised model, but I also think threshold sessions have their place, and both mentally and physically they're really quite effective, perhaps as much mentally as anything. Eating and nutrition during your long training sessions, so doing long sessions that are representative of your event. Duration is important, so if you're training for a long event, you need to do some long training sessions, because then you're stimulating the metabolic processes that are important for your event, and obviously you can't train them without actually using them, because why would they develop if you don't use them? So you've got a certain amount of work to do for your event, whatever that event may be. You need to fuel that event by eating, taking food and hydration, taking in liquids, and you work at a variable pace, so you have to train the higher end and the lower end, the lower intensity and the higher intensity. So how does all that fit together into a training program? In my experience, having coached a lot of people and actually done a fair amount of training myself, probably 3 hard sessions a week is the most that most people can handle. So I would focus on 2 or 3 main sessions per week. And by hard sessions, I mean either an interval session where you're working at high intensity and trying to accumulate the most time at high intensity that you can to stimulate, perhaps to improve your FTP or your VO2 max, or a long ride or a long run. So a long session would count as a hard session. So that they're the components that form your 3 focus training sessions for each week. And then all the rest is basically, it's not wasted effort, because the more you do, the better you will be. So you're trying to have as much volume. So I've got a quote here that I heard on a podcast. I think Alice Brownlee said it on the Dr. Hutch podcast. As much volume as you could manage without compromising the hard sessions. And I think that's a really good quote, because the more volume you do, the more efficient you'll become, as long as you're not making yourself overtired. And if you make yourself overtired, you're compromising the hard sessions. So that's the theory. And then I would do sort of the strength and the stretching and all the other activities. You need to consider, how important these are and how much you need them. I mean, strength training I think is great, and I do strength training, and I encourage all my athletes to do strength training. So I'm not saying it's a peripheral type thing, but it might not form one of your 3 main sessions of the week. So it's part of your additional volume, and you need to decide how important it is to decide how much you do. And then into that philosophy, it's worth considering the fact that your VO2 max plateaus quite quickly, and certainly after a few years of training, if you've been training in a structured and sensible way, you might not be able to increase your VO2 max very much. In general terms, you're not training to improve your VO2 max after the first couple of years of structured training, but you are training to maintain it. You don't want it to drop, because use it or lose it is a big principle in endurance sport. And also your FTP plateaus after a few years of training, so you might not be able to push your FTP up after a few years. So that then falls into that same category. You still have to do your interval training sessions. What's going to make the difference is being consistently training at a good volume, getting good recovery, and consistently doing good sessions will year on year just improve your efficiency and your metabolism, such that you can maybe go at a certain intensity for longer, maybe go at a little bit higher intensity for longer, or recover faster from going harder. So you're just gradually improving the nuances year on year, and you gradually get fitter and fitter. In fact, a good reference for that is Kilian Joney's paper that he wrote recently, and his interview with Stephen Seiler, which I thought was quite illustrative. And basically what he's saying is, it's years and years of training that you need to focus on building up year on year, that's going to make you into a great athlete. Or if you're knocking on a bit like me, you still got to think year on year, and that'll avoid the decline, or maybe promote some sort of improvement. So I think the long game, because endurance sport's all about the long game. It's not about a few weeks training to boost your FTP as Zwift or Trainer Road or whoever might like to make you think. And then of course it's putting all this together to form a weekly structure that you can use to your training. So if you're doing an endurance sport, then your endurance run or your endurance ride might be the most important part of your week. It's the most specific to your training. So, early season, it might not be the most important thing, because you might choose to train something that's not specific to your event. But as you get closer to your event, and particularly if it's an endurance event, you need to be focusing on that specific training. So for me, I always make that a key component of the week, and I would form the weekly structure around that. So you need to leave enough time after your long run or ride, your main endurance session, so you're sufficiently rested to do your interval training session. So on that basis, you might have your long training session on Saturday, you might do something medium on Sunday, and then you've got a nice weekend block. And then you need to recover for your interval session, which might be on the Wednesday. And then you want to fill in your low intensity volume around that to do as much volume as you can without compromising your main sessions. And that depends on your available time and energy. So I've got this example week here, and you can have a look at that and see how that's structured. It's structured sort of in the way that I've just described. Your long rides might be longer, your interval sessions might be different, you might be able to fit in strength work on different days, or you might commute to work as training, which is obviously a great way of building up volume, but it means you have to be careful and try and figure out how you fit in your other training sessions. Anyway, I hope you find this useful. Please comment, let me know what you think, let me know what else you'd like me to talk about, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.